Welcome, everybody, to another very special episode with a returning guest, the wonderful, the lovely, the very sports fanatical Doctor. Oh, sorry. Wait, are you have a doctorate?
I'm
Okay,
afraid so.
yeah, no, no. I always knew that you had a doctorate, but I was like, but wait, you don't put it on your things. Okay, so let's start that again. So I'll clap us in again. Would you like me to say Dr. David M. Perry or not?
I don't care. I really don't care. I mean, I do have a PhD, but it's not my feeling, and you can leave this in if you want. My feeling is that uh, PhDs have lost that. Yes, historically, we own the phrase doctor. It comes from Latin. It means teacher. That the title of professor matters a lot to me. That we should maintain sort of our um, we should claim our expertise in the public sphere, which is exactly one of the things I'm talking about with you today. But that the title of doctor, we've kind of lost it to the medical profession, and it's just not. It's not. I tilt at many windmills, and like all tilting at windmills, it is futile, and I will lose because that is what the metaphor is. But that is just not one of my windmills. There's the doctor title. I have other windmills.
And one of these other windmills, since we're going to leave that in because I think that's a very important point, is being a public scholar. We're here in general today to talk about your upcoming book or your if this goes out afterward, the book that is already out and that we will put a link to about being a public scholar. And so what is, in your estimation, because you define it a little bit differently than I think people might be more aware of, what in your estimation is a public scholar?
Yeah, so I mean there's the phrase the public intellectual that is a loaded phrase that has a long history and a huge bibliography that I did not include in this book because I was going to write a 10,000 word bibliographic essay and then I decided that actually wasn't what this book was about. But it is complicated, it is fraught, it is, you should go read the great Edward Said on the public intellectual. There's lots of things to talk about with that phrase. And I chose the public scholar. And what I mean by public scholarship is really any work by an expert, usually an expert with academic credentials of some sort, but in a broad capacity, that is intended in whole or in part for an extramural audience. And but I mean is that often as experts we speak to people within our context. So in academia, and let's be clear, I come from academia. I was a professor. I have a PhD. I still work in a history department. So I'm often thinking about when I'm thinking about inside the walls. I'm thinking about within my institution or within my discipline or within my related sort of field. But extramural, we when we do work, we are often talking. We should always know who our audience is, and that doesn't mean that we control who our audience is, but we should always imagine who our audience is, and that shapes the writing. And so, are we talking internally to people within our context, or are we hoping to talk externally, at least in part, to people outside of that context? And that's what I mean by the public scholar, someone who's taking expertise, and it could be expertise in content, but it could also be expertise in skill. It could be expertise in ways of knowing or ways of arguing or ways of understanding or any number of other kinds of things. We're taking the thing that we know and we're trying to do work that is aiming outwards towards a bigger extramural audience, at least to some extent. It's an expansive definition, and it's really important to me. So I'm glad we started here because what I do is the really easy one to define, in that I write essays, and sometimes the essays are based on my actual PhD topic in history, and sometimes they're based on me applying my ways of knowing to other topics like raising a son with Down syndrome, and again thinking broadly about it. But I like to think if your expertise is in performance and you're doing community theater, community dance, that is a form of public scholarship. If your expertise is in organization and you're organizing people to protest the fascist takeover of Minnesota, which is what I'm living through, though this phase seems to be shifting towards a new phase. But still, if you're using your expertise in that, then that is a form of public scholarship. If you are Minnesota, the University of Minnesota is has an agricultural school, as do all of these big public universities. And one of the things that a Minnesota professor invented was the Honeycrisp apple, which is a very good apple, although
Hmm.
there are lots of varietals now because they didn't tightly control the genome and some of them are not as good, but it's a very good apple. I think of the Honeycrisp apple as a form of public scholarship. And so I want us to have a really broadly my book's about essays. The thing that I know how to do is essays, not Apple genomics, if that's even the right word. The thing that I know how to do is essays and writing, but I want it to be in a context of a much bigger set of ideas.
I think what as well this book is tied is public service, really, because we think of public service as a public servant, but really what you're talking about here is how to serve public education in all different types of capacities. And I would certainly argue that the Honeycrisp apple is public service. Thank
It's
you.
delicious. Yeah.
It's one of the greatest apples of all time, and has certainly destroyed the Red Delicious, which is now not delicious. And I very much
And
appreciate
never was.
it never was always
Yeah.
mealy and gross.
Yeah.
But I think that public service, as in passing on that knowledge in a way that is understandable, tangible, and really can be used for further scholarship. That's really important. So in the book, you talk about four lessons of going public, of moving fast, lose control, write broadly, and write anything. Can you tell us a little bit about each of those things?
I can. So I opened the book by really just talking about my experience, and I did not set out to do this kind of public work. I studied medieval history. I knew that it was important and that it was important to lots of people and that it shaped modern lives, but I really was aiming towards a fairly standard. I just wanted to be a good teacher. My friend and social media presence, Kevin Gannon, the tattooed professor who you've probably seen on social media. He often says that teaching is the most important kind of public engagement that we do, this thing in the classroom. Totally agree. I even say it in the book. That's what I wanted to do. I just wanted to be a good teacher. I hope I'm still a good teacher, but I'm doing this other kind of work really by accident and without a lot of guidance for what that would look like. And that I had this model of fancy professors at Ivy League institutions writing for the New Yorker or the New York Review of Books or the New York Times or New York Magazine. I just said New York four times in a row on purpose. And similar sort of high status, publicly oriented venues, but in this very high status, very sort of Ivy League white guy world. The thing that I am doing now, I didn't actually even know was really possible, and that's part of why, again, I've written this book and I teach workshops on it because I it's possible for a lot of people. So there are lots of ways to get into it, but the easiest one, the way you overcome the catch-22 of the best way to get published is to be published. The best way to get published is to be published. That is a catch-22, but there are ways around it, and the easiest one, the one I've seen the most often, and the one that reflects in my own career, is when there is a news item about which you have something to say, especially if it connects directly to your expertise. And your expertise could be a scholarly expertise, as it was with mine, but it also could be a personal story that you have expertise in your own life that you're speaking from as well. Um, when news happens, there is a window in which, if you move quickly, you can enter that discourse. And I focus especially, though there are lots of ways of doing it, on the opinion page because there's an infrastructure there. When news happens, there are professional editors who are trying to think, okay, our job is literally to have someone comment on the news. Our economic model is also to get clicks at the moment when people are excited. And as I do throughout the book, I'm always sort of happy to talk about money. We're both, you and I, like we like to make money from writing. This is part of our income. It is a
You make
job. It
money
is,
from writing? Oh my
I
God.
mean, I also have a day job. That's part of the blunt
Yes.
talk, right? Like I have a
Yes.
day job with benefits, but it's labor and people should be compensated for their labor. And so I like to talk about that side of it. Well, editors have a job. They want to get clicks. They want to get readers. They want to get eyeballs at a moment when the news readership is focused on a thing. And then they also, I do think, from the many editors I've spoken to, understand as a vocation or as an important task to provide expert commentary, helping the public understand what's going on. So news happens, there is a window. If you move fast, sometimes like within 2 hours, rarely within more than 72 hours, and usually you need to be filed and done but within 72 hours. That is a place you can jump in. And once you're established, then lots of other things become possible. But the people who are already established, I mean, I hope they all buy and read my book and like it anyway, but they don't need it. It's written for someone who has not already got 50 bylines at elite magazines, but someone who's trying to sort of take this step. So you have to move fast.
Yeah, so
And
what
the
you're ta
Yeah,
oh,
go
so
on.
what you're talking about is, for those who don't know, things like op-eds, where if they have a
Right.
news story, you can then say, hey, you can email and say, I have an expertise in this. I would like to do an op-ed about this. I have sources, etc., and I would like to give my expertise.
Yeah.
That's part of what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Although that is what you've just said, and I appreciate that, is the kind of pitch I see the most get rejected by someone who otherwise could be. Because what you didn't say, and again, I'm saying this because it happens a lot, is you didn't say, and I will argue, right? That there's a
Yeah.
lot of people who say, hey, this thing has happened. I have expertise. I'd like to comment on it. What sells the piece is you say, I will argue, and then you fill in that blank. I literally want people to write those words down and then fill in the blank. You don't have to you don't, that doesn't go in the final piece, but like that is one of I always make sure I know what that blank is before I try to pitch an essay. Anyway, um, so yeah, so a thing happens, you have expertise, you want to write an op-ed. An op-ed is just a sort of a catch-all. You want to write some kind of public essay explaining what's going on. Then the next thing I need academics to understand is that you will lose control of your work the minute it's in public and in process. I still remember with my very first op-ed in 2006, seeing an old man. I mean, he's probably now my age, but at the time he seemed like an old man. Um, Reading my essay in a coffee shop connected to a grocery store where my wife and I went grocery shopping on the Sunday it was published, and that was really weird. So that's nice. It goes out in the
Did
world.
you lean over to him and say,
I
I hate that
Yeah.
guy. He's really
No,
terrible.
I said, "Oh, yeah, I see you're reading that. What do you think?" He says, "Well, I agree with some bits and I agree with some other bits." And I thought maybe I've asked enough questions. Or I agree with some bits, I disagree with some bits. I just sort of thought that was interesting. And certainly on social media, things are going to go, but it's more than that, it's also editors are going to take control of parts of it, not all of
Hmm.
it, but an editor gets to I don't know, have their fingers in the pie or their spoons in the soup or whatever it is. They play an important role in this, and they are going to take some of that control. The essay is going to go out into the world often at an astonishingly rapid pace, and things are going to happen, and maybe it'll just be ignored. That is one of the things that can happen. But you have to be ready for it to be outside of your control. The other thing that I want sort of potential public writers to understand is that you are not limited in just your small area of subject expertise and the kind of work you can do. So for me, the example I use is my real breakthrough came in writing about 13th century Italy, which had a weird news cycle around the retirement of Pope Benedict in 2013. So that was I'm actually a 13th century Italianist, so weirdly enough, I had this very specific expertise. But I kind of got into this. I wanted to write about my son and about disability and about parenting. And that is not where I have academic expertise, but I have done a lot of reading. I am trained to learn things. I'm trained to write. I did a lot of teaching. And so it is possible to move outside of your narrow area. And this is really important because I'm not asking people to bullshit. Right? I'm not
Yeah, no.
asking people to claim expertise they don't have. But as an academic, what happens to you is you are told throughout your graduate training to get smaller and smaller and smaller in terms of what you claim expertise in. So, I said 13th century Italy, but in a more academic setting, I might say 13th century Venice, and an even more academic setting, I might say 13th century Venice from 1192 to 1239, focusing on these seven documents and these four people, right? That's appropriate. That is part of what academic expertise looks like. But to the rest of the world, I can say I'm a historian, period. I'm a historian. I want to write about history. My last piece, one of the last pieces I wrote was about the formation of the Department of Homeland Security in the USA in October of 2022, writing about that moment as a historian. I was working as a historian. Yes, it was modern US history, but I was doing the work of a historian, and I'm claiming my space as a historian because that is how knowledge looks more broadly. And then once you kind of get going, I want people to know you can write about anything you want. Again, you should write about things you have something legitimate to say about. You should write about things you have, real arguments to make, but that in public scholarship, there is room to write new ways and new things and new formats and try to, I was just talking, I've published one listicle out of my, I don't know, 600 essays, but I did write a listicle. I never thought I would write a listicle, which if for younger people who may not know, listicles where your essay is just basically a list of things, the top 10, this was the top 99 problems facing higher education, because I wanted to make a point. But it's a space that opens up to creativity. Other people go in a more literary direction, writing essays, literary nonfiction with a kind of prose and style and content that would just never fit in academic writing. Again, that's beautiful. That's part of what's possible. That was a long answer, but it's also the whole first chapter of my book.
Yes,
So
but that's really important because even though your book really focuses on essays, as you say, it's more really important to academia how to, I would say this is more about how to be a public academic, not necessarily a public scholar, because yes, we say the word scholar, but I think a lot of people, when you say the word scholar, people automatically assume that you're attached to a university. Now you are, but there are many public scholars or public historians who are not.
yeah,
And I think that when people think public scholar, it's a teacher or professor who's attached to university who is doing public lectures or who is offering public classes as a service. Whereas this is another form of public scholarship, that public authorship as well, that can help you. You can use your academic skills, as you say, in order to give better information to some. That's really what even things that's what I'm doing. I don't call myself a historian. I am a historical researcher because I don't find new things out about
yeah.
history. I take the sources that are already available to me, but with my academic expertise, then I present it in a way that maybe is more palatable or acceptable to the public.
Yeah.
But in being public,
I
um,
think of that as public. I absolutely think of you as if you want to be included in my expansive definition of what I'm thinking about in terms of public scholarship. And these are tough. We debated the title. I rethink these phrases all the time. Um, I don't know. I don't know what the right words are. I'm happy with the public scholar as the title of this book and what I do, but I never want anyone who isn't formally associated with the university. And I want to be clear, I'm staff. So whether or not I'm a scholar is sort of up for debate. I certainly don't get, like my day job does not include scholarship. It includes library access, which is nice, but it does not include scholarship. So, I don't want people who know things and are doing the work and then trying to reach out to broad audiences. I hope that everyone feels seen within this, or at least feels welcome within this framework if they want to be.
and there are difficulties though that come with being a public scholar or a public academic. And something I tell my students as well is that if you want to be public, you must deal with the public.
That's right.
And you have to be open on social media. Doesn't matter which one, pick one. You have to, I say, always have like a Patreon or a Substack or a newsletter or something so you can show people all the things that you've written in the last month or 2 months, however long you want to do it. And then having to deal with protecting and really defending yourself. You have to defend your works. How do you go about that? Because there is a section about talking about before and after publication and what you should do and how you should get
Yeah.
paid. But really, it's how to build an audience and how to
Yeah.
protect yourself.
It varies a lot by person, by risk, by topic, are you someone who, like you, is being more entrepreneurial? Well, then you actually have to build a lot of your own audience. Are you someone who has a faculty position and sort of a stable job and a reputation, and you just want to do this, once every 2 or 3 years when a topic really grabs you? Well, then actually you don't have to build a lot of audience. You can just, write for a media outlet that publishes you and feel good about it. You don't have to read the comments. You don't have to talk to anyone about it online. And there are lots of people who want to do that. And I think that's really important because the people who already want to be, engaging the public are doing it in different ways, and I think I can offer a lot of tips for how to do it more efficiently and how to enter new spaces and lots of other things. But there's just a lot of academics out there who really know things, have things they want to say, either about their expertise, their scholarly expertise, or other stuff, and I don't want them to look at me or you and think, "Oh God, it's going to take over my whole life." It has taken over my whole life. My sense is it's taken over a lot of your life. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. You can just write a piece every 2 years when you're really moved to do so, and at that moment contribute something, and then stop. You don't have you don't have to read the comments. You don't have to be online. But if you want to build something, you will have to figure out ways of creating an audience and connecting with people. And it can be worthwhile. My answer to that question has changed a lot over the years. When I first started publishing, I did read the comments spaces on CNN. CNN does not have comment pages, but it did then. I remember I wrote an essay on anti-vax and Jenny McCarthy and parenting around that. And it had something like 8,000 comments on CNN. And I did not read all 8,000, but I read a couple thousand because it was interesting. And, within 150, they were no longer talking about me or my essay. They were yelling at each other, and I just sort of sat there and read it. It was interesting. In the heyday of Twitter, it was a really good space to engage with whatever was happening with your piece. It is not a good space now. So Blue Sky works like that, having different kinds of ways. I actually think that once you have done your part of putting your words out there, you are not obligated to listen to people reacting. And I say that because a lot of, particularly to people in academia, there's a lot of things. Oh, well, this is a classroom. You need to listen to the responses, and you do need to be open to sort of good, well-intentioned, good faith responses, even if they're very critical, as has certainly happened to me thousands of times. But you don't have to be open to bad faith responses. If I have a student, I actually do owe them a lot of attention. Whereas if I have, Nazi 1488, .gov or whatever yelling at me, I don't owe that person anything. I don't owe them a second of my time, even if, I have done my part. I've put my words out there. They have to convince me that they're good faith before I give them time back. And you do not owe them things. Um, I do think sometimes that the risk of any one individual act of public engagement creating significant backlash is overblown. The likelihood of any one piece doing that is actually not very high, but it is not zero. And if you are consistently working in public spaces, there will be moments when things go badly or get out of control. Sometimes because you've made a mistake, as again, I have done plenty of times. Sometimes because just people are bad, engaging in bad faith, or I write about abortion and guns and the Holocaust and crusades and plenty of other things that spark strong feelings and not always good faith feelings. And you have the right to protect yourself, and you should. I always say that the minute things go bad, you need to log out.
Yeah.
And then first step is you log out immediately when things start getting bad. Then you contact a trusted friend and have them log in. And everyone in the space should have someone. I mean, I have a friend named Adam. I talk about him a lot. Adam is my guy. That if I need someone to log in and see what's going on, and clean things up and block people and tell me when it's safe and log anything that's actionable or possibly a threat. I've had, I don't get, I'm a white guy, so I get fewer threats than other people, but I'm also a Jew, so I get different kinds of threats than other people. I have had threats of both physical and sex, death threats and rape threats against me. Not a lot, but some, and I remember them. I know. Um,
Wow.
you want to log those. You want to be like, I mean, you're not like read them, but you need to
Yeah.
keep them saved somewhere in case things get worse. But you also like reading those things is bad for you when they're aimed at you. And so I have my friend Adam, and you need a friend. You need someone to do that. And because you don't actually have to read people attacking you. And if you spend a lot of time in these spaces, you will see that some writers really like to share their hate mail. They find it satisfying, they find it cathartic, they generate, feedback against the person who is attacking them. Jamel Bowie on Blue Sky often shares his hate mail. It's filled with the N-word. That is a choice he gets to make, and clearly he does it on purpose. And he is also getting a scale of hate mail that is beyond anything I can imagine, both because of his visibility, but also because of his identity and the way that plays out. Um, I don't share my hate mail. I find it really upsetting, and if it's, I mean, I share it if it's goofy, but if it, like the real hate mail that is, talking articulating violence towards me and the most anti-Semitic stuff, I actually find it really upsetting, and I just try to put it away somewhere safe, or I get someone else to do it, and I think that's important. But I don't want your listeners to think this is the likely outcome of doing a single or some small acts of public work, because that is not the likely outcome. You need to be ready for it, you need to be aware of it, but you don't like it should not like you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to
Yeah.
say like it's
No, you
real,
have
but
to.
I
I
don't
was
want to
not
overblow it at
prepared.
the same time. Yeah, I'm
When
sure.
I first did public scholarship stuff in 2009, I was not prepared. And
Yeah.
it was very simple things about things that I liked. Had no it was literary comparisons about fantasy characters,
Yeah.
and it was swift. And this is like in the early days of the internet
Yeah, yeah.
too. But it was swift and it was very hateful. I made no comments about made no comments about gender, religion, rate, nothing of
Yeah.
anything. And yet people still there are people who just feel very strongly about certain fantasy characters, and it becomes their identity, and they act like you are attacking their
Yeah.
identity. So it was like 6 months where I didn't want to touch anything anymore.
Yeah.
And I completely removed myself from that space, and I went, nope, never doing that again. We're going over here. And that's exactly what I did. But I
Yeah.
didn't expect you. I think it's an important warning,
Yeah.
because even if you're writing about something completely innocuous, like how great Honeycrisp apples are,
Right, right.
you will get somebody in the comments going, "How dare you like Honeycrisp over Granny Smith? I'm gonna kill you." And you just go,
It is.
where is this coming from? I don't
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
And there's going to be no answer, but you do have to protect yourself against it, and you should be
Yeah.
prepared for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so this book focuses a lot on writing, but then there's a chapter where you talk about expanding your views and expanding into other things. And you talk about things like podcasts like this one,
Yeah.
talk about videos, which you sometimes do, even though you've said you not necessarily, you say you don't like doing them or that you're not good at them, which I heartily disagree with, respectively.
Thank you.
Um, you also talk about journalism, which you do.
I like being
And
on your videos. I like other people bringing me on to talk. That's I just don't. Anyway, who knows? Sorry, go on.
And you also talk about things like blogging, newsletters. So
Yeah.
how can people, if they're just doing writing, how can people really expand into those places?
Well, the first thing is that you have no business creating something that you don't consume. And you can consume it strategically. You don't have to be, subscribed to 500 podcasts to do a podcast. But if you want to do a podcast, the first thing you do is you find good podcasts you like and you listen to them and you think about them. If you want to do TikTok, you should be really thinking about TikTok. And watching videos or short form videos or long form or YouTube channels. If you want to be writing doing blogging, which I use as kind of a catch-all for iterative writing on a platform that you control. So newsletters, more traditional blogs, whatever. But it's fairly regular writing, and you may or may not have an editor. Plenty of people do, but that is really your platform. You decide what goes up, and you should be thinking about it. The great thing is that people who have any kind of academic training, and I really mean everyone who has been through even, a good high school English class, but certainly anyone who's pursued it farther, has been this is one of the great things about sort of the liberal arts is that you've been given an education for how to think critically about genre and form and structure and discourse and how it works. So you can apply that rigor to the public facing components of what comes out and think about it critically. So you can, if you want to write literary nonfiction, which is to say longer essays focusing a lot on the beauty of language, sometimes in non-storytelling ways, so that that they work, they move, they jump throughout time in weird ways. And I mean, there's lots of amazing nonfiction being published that does not start at the beginning and proceeds the middle and end at the end, which is what my nonfiction tends to do in a fairly straightforward way. There's incredible stuff. The first thing you have to do is you have to read it. You want to get in Paris Review, well, read the Paris Review. And if you don't, then you have no business trying to get in the Paris Review. That, to me, that as an academic, I'm very comfortable saying you have to do the homework before you start producing content. Um, but the great news is the content's out there, so you could just have to apply your skills as a reader, as an analyst, as a scientist, whatever skills you have to that genre, and then think about it critically. The other piece, though, and this is true with, I talk about it really explicitly with the kind of essay writing I do, but it's true in every one of these industries, is that there is a non-visible part of it, whether it's how editing works or how podcasters make money, right? How you pitch the podcasters who are on networks. How did they get on those networks where the network is doing the advertising, where the network is taking a slice of it? How did they get on that? How did they pitch it? How do they, and how much money, right? Is it $1,000 a month? Is it $10 a month? Is it $150,000 a year? I don't know. I mean, these things. So that's invisible. If you want to be a nonfiction trade author, there are these things, nonfiction trade book proposals, that are very specific, weird documents that are not public. They are not written to the reader. They're written to the agent and the editor, although there's lots of information about it online. In my case, there's the essay pitch. There's these 6 or 7 sentence emails that you write to get the attention of an editor. You got to write those emails really well, but they are by definition not public. And so, this isn't different to me than if you see a piece of scholarship, you don't necessarily see the grant application that got the funding to do the research, to do the scholarship. That grant application is the invisible part of it. And that's true across our industry, more or less formally. And I'm sort of encourage people, one, to consume the public part, think about it critically, watch this podcast and think about, what, not just what I say, but what you say. How have you prepared to interview an author in order to produce something that the viewer will think is good or not? Hopefully they like it, but to think critically about it, right? To think structurally about it. But what they don't see is that my publicist contacted you with an arc of the book in advance, or even I think actually you reached out to
I
me
did,
and I
yeah.
contacted my publicist who then right? There's this whole like invisible part of it, which in our case is very simple because we've known each other for a while, and so you just said, "Hey, you've got a new book. Let's talk about it." But it doesn't always work like that. Publicity is not always, it's never visible, and it's not always simple. And so these are the kinds of things that one, where I really know it, I try to make it legible to the reader, but if not, there's work to be done.
To your point, I never thought I would be doing academic podcasts. It was during COVID where
Yeah.
I was doing research for a history book, The History of Holidays, which will be out eventually. And I needed
I feel
to
like someone I know blurbed that book and said it was great.
really, wow, I wonder who that could be. Wow, amazing.
Yeah, it's
But
because it's great. But go
So
on.
it took about 3 years of research, and it was something that I could do during COVID. But I had to contact Professor Ronald Hutton about questions about his writing, and he was very generous with his time. And I said, would you be okay for an interview? Because I started listening to podcasts during COVID while I was walking just to get some air during the day while we all couldn't go anywhere. And he said,
Yeah.
"Yeah, I'd love to be interviewed by you." And I never in my life thought I never thought he would say yes, ever.
Yeah.
And so then I went, "Oh no, now I have to come up with questions." So I asked everybody, every academic that I knew who knew him, I said, "Give me your questions. I'm putting them together." And if you actually watch that first interview, it's terrible, not because of him, but because of me, because you could
Sure.
see that I'm nervous. I over prepared and didn't realize I kept minding the time, but he kept giving us more time. But then after that interview, I realized, well, if I just asked him and he said yes, why don't I ask other scholars? And
Yeah.
90% of them do say yes. And
Yeah.
I say this is an academic podcast. You can shop whatever you want. And then I thought exactly as you did. How do I get this onto platforms? Podbean was available. I use Podbean for free. Because we're not getting paid for this, well, I can have it out there and people can just access it. And so because it's free and it's out there, more and more people access it. And therefore it's now become, a 40,000 listener style podcast, all for the sake of academia. And that's 4 years. And I never thought I
Yeah.
would do that. But it's really just exactly as you say. You do the research, you say, how is this done? Okay, now I have to figure it out. How is this done? Let me figure it out. If I don't know the answer, I will go ask a specialist. Ask a specialist, get your credential to Europe. And now there is a website. There are places where people can access this. This is on Spotify. It's wherever you get your podcasts, etc. There's visuals. There's audio. And I had to learn how to edit this and how to do everything. And that's just how it is. But it is a form of public academia, public scholarship that
Yeah.
I never thought I would ever get into. And it was really just because I was doing exactly as you say. I was listening to podcasts for the first time really during COVID. I was really enjoying the fact that, wait a minute, there's academic lectures on podcasts.
Right.
And so that's how this was born. And just want to
Yeah.
take a very quick second to talk about public engagement uh, in the 21st century. And you mentioned tenure, which I thought was very amusing. Uh,
It still exists, not as much, but the people who aren't in the academic system are not held back by the academic system, even if there are problems, right? Like the people who are not in the faculty job world are not limited. Like they never think, oh, well, I shouldn't do this because it won't get me tenure. That ship has sailed. I don't have, I mean, I had tenure, just so your listeners and viewers know, I was a full professor and I quit. And I quit not because of any principle, but because I wanted to raise my kids in Minnesota. And I was living in Chicago, which was fine. I have lots of reasons for wanting to do that. But, I thought we might be a little happier here. And I thought happiness was more important than full professorship. And I stand by that. So I've been on both sides, but I also know that a lot of people inside the faculty world or aspirationally towards the faculty world are held back from certain kinds of work because they don't know, because they don't know how it'll fit.
and it is difficult. I mean, and how do you fit your public scholarship life with your professional scholarship life?
Yeah. Well, again, like I don't have to. So I do have as part of my job description doing sort of work on public history work, thinking about history doing history in public, which is a lot of what my writing is. It's a small percentage of my job description. I'm a state employee, so like we have very detailed job descriptions by the percentage. It's a whole thing. Um, so I have permission to talk to you over lunch today, on the clock. I hope. But but when I was in academia, I was at an institution that was a teaching oriented institution. So it did not require a heavy load of scholarship for which this stuff might have been seen as a distraction. This stuff was seen as really part of the mission of this institution that was very much about trying to make a better world. It was a left-wing Catholic institution that really took social teaching seriously, and so they loved what I was doing. It was fine. The thing that is so interesting to me about public engagement in academia is that the models for how to include it and count it 100% already exist. And when I went into this, I thought I was going to have to invent a wheel. And it turns out there are lots of wheels. They are invented, they are published, they are in websites, they are in books. Scholarly organizations write whole handbooks to them. What they haven't been is adopted fully into academic culture and norms. By which I mean, and this is, I'm opposed. I see academic administration as management and myself and also faculty as labor. And so doesn't mean that we have to hate each other, but there's definitely a tension always for me. It's the kind of lefty I am between management and labor. I know this isn't earth-shattering, except that most faculty don't think of themselves as labor. That's the problem here. But this is not a problem that's on management side. If you tell management as a department or a discipline, hey, we want to count public facing work in these ways, I have actually never talked to a dean or a provost who said, "Oh, we can't do that. That's not traditional scholarship." It's us, it's academics, it's people with PhDs, it's people with tenure that are gatekeeping here. That even if the formal tenure and promotion document says we count public scholarship, they don't really mean it. That in the conversation of whether to vote yes or no, or pass someone through their 30 review or promote them to full professor, it's just, did they do the standard academic things? In history, it's peer, and many other fields, it's write a university press peer-reviewed book. In other programs, it's get certain kinds of grants or do certain kinds of juried art shows or whatever it is. And if the answer is yes, then fine. If the answer is no, then not fine. And sure, if it's yes and public scholarship, well, then, little golf clap, that's good too. But it's not, no one can use it as, very rarely can people use it as the main, sort of structural support of a tenure or promotion case. And I would like that to change. And elite administrations, who again I'm kind of opposed to by nature, are actually on that side. It's the faculty that have not, in general, not all faculty. I'm sure everyone listening to this podcast is 100% there already, but it's the faculty. It's really faculty. It's academics themselves, us ourselves, that have kept this from uh, really being incorporated into the academy as much as it could be. But the model's already there. We don't have to invent this. We just have to do, as with the other things, do the reading, think about it structurally, and then produce your guidelines that make sense within your context.
So you have a small manifesto at the end
I
of the
do.
book, which I don't want to give away entirely because I want people to read it. But is there something that you would like to tell people who are interested in public scholarship that we haven't discussed
Yeah.
already?
Uh, yeah, I mean, a couple different things, I guess. There are lots of people out there pushing the idea that people with expertise should engage with the public more broadly as much as possible. And I'm one of them, but because there are lots of other people doing that, I've really focused my time on this sort of nuts and bolts, right? How to pitch, how to get paid, how to work with an editor, how to promote yourself on social media, how to do these things that are not inspirational. That I'm not trying to teach you how to find your voice, not because I think academics often do need to find their voice. It may happen in grad school, but they may need to do it with a writing coach. But those writing coaches are already there. They are doing that work. It's good work. So I don't want people to think I'm dismissive of the motivational, inspirational, sort of coaching kind of writing world out there. I think that's great. It's just other people are doing it. So I really have tried to focus on this, but I of course do think it is good. And I do think it is important. I don't think it's an opposition to specialized scholarship. I don't think that every piece of academic writing needs to be written with the voice that I think public writing has to engage with. The public writing, I think it's fine to write highly specialized scholarship that is really aimed inwards rather than outwards, right? But that is a choice you should make. But I do think we are in a pretty fraught moment, particularly when it comes to the role of expertise in the public consciousness, in decision making, in shaping the news and shaping opinion. I'm in Minnesota, as I said earlier, right? This is, I think, day 70 of the occupation by our Department of Homeland Security. They are theoretically beginning to leave, but they were taking people off the streets 10 minutes from my house yesterday. Apparently, this morning they're surrounding schools. Um, I have tried to engage this moment by thinking not just what can I do as a Minnesotan, although that is happening in terms of um, the many activities that I don't really talk about in public because that's not the way to do it. Oh, there's many things I'm doing as a Minnesotan, as a citizen, but also what can I do as a historian? What are the things that I can do as a historian right now that might be useful? It took me about a month to figure out what some of those things were in terms of writing and thinking, but then I have begun doing that kind of labor. And other people have as well within my cities. There are these beautiful, sort of poets and literary people who have been writing letters from Minnesota for LitHub. Um, they're beautiful, and many of them are written in a kind of uh, sentence level beauty to which I mean I would love to achieve, but I don't. That's not actually what the kind of writing I know how to do. When I try to do that writing, it just sort of gets sort of like sophomore in high school kind of level of aspiring towards beauty. It's just not. If I write a good sentence, it's by accident. Or a beautiful sentence, it's by accident. I think there are some good sentences out there, but most I only know because other people have like read them back to me. That's just not what I do. But it's what they do. Like, these poets and authors and that is a kind of public scholarship. And it would be easy to not do that, but it really makes the stakes clear that if there are a lot of crises and expertise is part, not all of it, but it's part of the response to that crisis. And so uh, if you can do something, I think there is a moral obligation to the extent it's safe for your family, to the extent that you have the mental bandwidth. I don't think people need to endanger their family to do it. I don't think people need to endanger their mental health to do it. I have endangered my mental health at times doing this kind of work, and I think you need to be really thoughtful about it. But within the context of what's possible, if you can do it, I think academics really should, at least should know how. So that's the manifesto.